Hi, I'm Alan. I'm here today to talk about API portals of the past, the present, and the future, and try to answer the question whether or not they will get better. Short introduction to myself. I'm the CEO, co-founder, and API product manager at Apiable. I have well over 20 years enterprise IT experience prior to founding Apiable back in April of 2020. With Apiable, you can create, secure, market, and monetize your API products with a unified API portal across your gateways. And there's a URL there in case you want to find out a little bit more about Apiable. But let's crack on with the presentation. We're going to start with the past. Like, where do we start with API portals? I worked for Swisscom about 10 years ago now. And I joined the API program at Swisscom. And we were all geared up for developers, right? So we had a developer portal, we had a developer evangelist, with developer documentation, and so on. When you came to the developer portal, you saw immediately snippets of code and API specifications. Community was there for developers. So we had a lot of fun doing that. It was great speaking to other developers. I have a developer background myself, so there's a lot of fun doing that. But when we kind of fast forward 18 months or so into the future, we found that we didn't really get the engagement on the APIs that we needed. So we had certain benchmarks internally on the amount of APIs that were used and the amount of APIs that were created, which is what you did back then. But we found that we didn't get that engagement. The developers didn't come. They didn't read the blog posts. We stopped creating blog posts, for example. The developer community kind of like dried up a little bit from the initial people who were interested. And so we started this period of kind of looking at that and saying, okay, why are the developers not coming? And if they're not the ones using the APIs, then who is? And what we found is like the good old enterprise architect or solution architect behind the scenes was really the key persona for us in that time, who was going out and finding other organizations who would want to use our APIs and telling them, hey, let's design a solution around you using our APIs. So they were acting like almost as a salesperson for us in our APIs. And we found this whenever we spoke to a developer and we onboarded them, we'd be like, how great, using our APIs, how did you find us? And quite often the developer would say, look, it was in the sprint backlog. My product owner told me to come and consume this API. That's the only reason I'm here, right? And that probably explains how we got away with a bit of a lousy developer experience, because some of these developers weren't by choice. Others were, but most were brought to the portal via some kind of ticketing system. So that's kind of like where we were in the past. If we go into the present now and have a look at kind of like where we are today, I think we're at this point now where we accept that there is a persona beyond the developer. Developers are important, especially as like the user of the API portal, but we need to also accommodate more of this business manager role as well. And the reason for that is that the business manager is also there as someone who can give the go-ahead, make the decision on whether or not to use the API. Historically, that would be a developer. In some cases, it still is. But if you have, telecommunications APIs where you're getting access to customer data or banking APIs and things like this, it's quite often a business-to-business decision needs to be made on whether or not to use it. In order to explain the API to a business manager, you might need to describe it in more non-technical terms. And we're starting to see this now. I'll give you a couple of examples. One from Nordia here in the Nordics, where we're starting to put this balance in and say, okay, like developers, sure, right? They're the actual like user. You got to have a great developer experience. No one's denying that. On the other side of the fence, you've got business users, so business managers. And here you'll see words like business opportunities, right? Creating new business opportunities. And we're trying to speak to those business managers now. Another example here, again, I think this one's from Mercedes-Benz, where you're given basically two streams. You can either get like quite technical quite quickly, or you can talk on a enterprise business level again about new business opportunities. Surprise, surprise. So having those conversations with business managers within your API portal is starting to become important even today. What we're seeing though is we're hitting a little bit of a cul-de-sac here, in that we talk to the business managers, but we don't have any kind of flow or process within the API portal for them, right? The API portals are still developer portals when you sign up to them. You get in, and then you have to get stuck into your API specifications, get your keys and etc. It's a developer experience. We're not providing any experience for them. If a business manager wants to do something with the API, they're usually given an email address to contact, and maybe you have a conversation with them. But as far as like a process, today there's no formal process for that. Let's look briefly into the future now. We see that behind every developer is a team, right? So with the work we're doing at Apiable, we're seeing that it is a business manager, and it's a developer, and it's the enterprise architect. It's the whole team is responsible for integrating different systems, right? So we don't look solely at the developer. We say, okay, it could be that the person subscribing to the API product is then from the business side as well. And I feel we should all be moving away from the developer subdomain, right? It's very popular for API portals. It has been for a long time historically. But if we start using the digital domain, as we ended up doing at Swisscom, actually, it's more inclusive of all of those personas. So as a business manager, if I go to developer.acme.com, I'm immediately like, oh, this probably isn't for me, right? I'm not a developer. I might not even click the link, right, if it says developer. So I think digital would be a better kind of domain or something like this to engage more people on your API portal. We can do a quick demo here of something we put together for BICMO, which I think is probably interesting for the audience. And what we did for BICMO is we put together a demo app. And the demo app caters for both this business manager and the developer. So as we step into this demonstration here, we have like, okay, a landing page which tells you about the product, but within the portal you can get a demo, right? So we've come out to the demo where you see a mock catalog of bikes in this case, because we're selling bike insurance, right? And I've flipped out there at the top to the API. So I'm speaking to a CIO or a developer there. And now I'm flipping back to speak to a business manager. Now I can show the API as well in the conversation to say, this is a request and this is the response. But depending upon my audience, I can change the way I go through it. I can say, like, if you use our APIs, this is the likely flow on how this API would be used, right? So you take something which is very abstract and you turn it into something which is really concrete, right? It's one of the problems we have with APIs is that sometimes the only people who can understand them actually are developers, because they are abstract by nature. So what we've done here is we've given the partner managers from BICMO the possibility to go and speak to the CEO of organizations, and maybe the CIO is in the meeting room at the same time, and they can address like both of those technical and non-technical audiences at the same time. So in terms of like the future of where we're going, I'd expect there to be more of these like, demo portals where you mock out a quick interface and wire up the API behind it. Let's go to the next slide. There's this question at the moment. It's quite hot, about monetization and if you should monetize your APIs or not. Twitter recently announced, I think, on their enterprise plan, you could be paying $42,000 a month, I think it was, for access to the Twitter APIs. I think Reddit have something similar at the moment where they've basically pulled the plug on free access to the data. A lot of that is obviously coming from the unwillingness to train AI models from just free data, right? So they've seen this and it's like, hey, you know, AI and ChatGPT is getting trained for free, and they want to get a piece of that pie, obviously, right? So there's a lot of monetization coming up from that, and these discussions are going to increase. I do feel a lot of organizations are leaving money on the table. I think, you know, maybe you don't have to go as crazy as 42,000 per month. But looking at the value of your API, there could be a monetization case there, right? More often than not, we're seeing, especially with larger companies, that the value is indirect. So it's about like strategically locking in a customer to your platform, your ecosystem, when they're using your APIs. Makes it very hard then to move to a competitor and keep that integration, right, without having to redo it and get developers and so on. So that kind of like lock-in effect strategically, upselling customers via your APIs and things like this, right? But this is definitely in the future conversation we're going to have more and more. And I believe that more and more developers and business managers will get used to paying for API access, right? Today we have a very open API community, which will continue, but I think at the same time it will be, become more common to have monetization. In the future, I think we need to get the API portals more automated. Working again, like in telecommunications and so on, if you want to get access to an API, generally speaking, you have to kind of like, okay, go for the approval processes, which is sometimes absolutely necessary. But even the productization of the API isn't there, so you don't really understand what it does. It takes a long time to get going. You maybe need to ask someone in the API team of the organization to explain the API and provide sample codes and all these kind of things. We're getting there, right? But I think, you know, we need to get at least like 80% automated with this stuff, meaning that the business manager can understand it, subscribe to it, invite their developers in, control who has access to the API keys, and let them self-serve themselves a lot, right? And then I think you'll see a lot more like API scale. At the moment, I think we're onboarding people in quite a linear manner and doing a lot of manual work and repeating ourselves a lot. But in the future, we hopefully will get a lot more automated with this stuff. Thinking a little bit, you know, beyond the API portal, even, you know, like, okay, we've put here polls of the next 10 years, but what comes beyond, I think we need to start thinking about, you know, ecosystems and reaching the API consumer. And I originally wrote developer there and corrected myself. API consumers, if they're business managers, enterprise architects, developers, whoever they are, but reaching them at like the key point, and maybe in a greater ecosystem, and saying, okay, hey, look, here's our API. Not necessarily making people come and log into a developer portal or an API portal and saying, okay, going through that onboarding and reading through the documentation. Because in the future, API consumers could also be bots. Bots probably don't want to log into a portal. They don't want to just consume the API. And yeah, I think we need to think a little bit about, you know, API portals as ecosystems, and that's going to be like an interesting challenge for us over the next 10 years. So yeah, that's the end of my presentation. please don't hesitate to get in touch, right? So you can see my email address is here. You can email me. You can even call me if you're old school. Connecting me with me on LinkedIn. There's a LinkedIn QR code there. You can scan that, then you get straight to my profile. So love talking about API products, API portals. So yeah, get in touch. Thanks.